everybody. When you make purchases later this morning, you've got them ready to go home and get on the right show program. Before we get started though, make sure that everybody has, on several of the seats, there was a set of flyers and a feed scoop. Make sure that you've got some of those. I know nobody wanted to sit up front, but I was optimistic anyway. So if you want to grab a couple of those flyers and push them to the back, that'd be fine. Before we get started today though, I really want to hear, or Crystal and I really want to hear from you guys, like what do you want to learn about today? Like why did you come? What's really on your mind so that we can make sure that we cover the things that you're interested in?
Well, my show heifers get fat.
Why do they get fat? Okay?
I have jerseys.
Okay. Somebody else said the same question. Okay. All right. What else? Yeah.
Best way to, healthiest, safest way to take weight off of maybe a heavier heifer.
Yeah. Okay. Diet programs. Okay, got it. What else? Anything else? All right. Well, we'll make sure that anybody have questions about these things? Probiotics, yep, which ones? All right, yep, for sure. All right, well, we'll make sure that we cover those things for sure. And what we want to start with is just kind of some of the basics of calf and heifer nutrition and just kind of what you're trying to accomplish, right? So everybody knows that we're trying to raise a heifer that's tall, she's thin, has a lot of lean structural growth, right? But is also ready to compete in the future, right? Because I think that one of the things that you learn with show heifers is if you keep them thin all year round, they never grow. And a lot of heifers that you keep too thin in the spring just won't have enough. I always say they don't have enough oomph for the fall. And everything, and I think with a calf and heifer starts when they're babies, right? So you want to start with a good calf feeding program that has a good milk replacer, good calf starter. And Crystal, maybe talk a little bit about some of the basics of a good calf and heifer program.
Sure. How many people here use milk replacer versus whole milk? Is everyone on milk replacer? Milk replacer mostly? Yes. So milk replacer, we have lots of options. So you want to get a high protein milk replacer. You don't need super high protein though. There is an opportunity to do too much protein in calves. We can give nutritional scours. If it's more protein than they need, they also have to expend energy to break that down and get rid of it. So you might see some loose manure, and then also it's just a waste of energy, waste of resources. So making sure you're pairing the right milk replacer with the right starter. So you can do, if you have a high enough milk replacer, you might not even need a 21% starter, and 18% might be okay. So like we have total calf, this is our 18%. It is amino acid balanced, so it also can get away with having lower crude protein because we're actually giving the calves the amino acids that they need. So a combination of either a good milk replacer or a good whole milk program with a good starter to get going is great. And getting that starter intake, or the 18%, whatever you're using as a starter, getting that starter intake right out of the gates is key to getting that rumen to develop. So like Josh starts offering grain right away, you even put it in her mouth, right?
Yeah, so we start at 2 days. So Crystal, how long does it take from the time a calf first starts to eat till you have a rumen developed?
It takes about 60 days or more. So the grain is what's developing that rumen.
Right.
So yes, that milk has a lot of energy. Yes, that's what they drink and get a lot of nutrients out right away. But once they come off that milk program, if the rumen's not ready, that's when you see those heifers kind of crash, those calves crash after weaning. So making sure that you have enough starter intake. Yeah, I mean, depending on your breed, it should be upwards of 6-8 pounds by the time they're weaned. And the butyrate that comes from the grain breakdown is what really develops the rumen papillae on the wall of that rumen. So the grain is what does that. It's not hay, it's not milk. So if you're feeding too much milk even, that they're not getting the grain intake, then you might actually be doing more harm than good because they might take a step backwards after weaning.
Yeah, like the most important thing that I would want you to take away from today is just how important it is to get calves to eat grain early in life. So like Crystal said, it takes 60 days to develop the rumen. So then that 60 days, you don't shrink that. That starts on day 2 if they're starting to eat a little bit of grain, or that starts on day 32 if you wait a month to really start to get them eating grain because you're really pushing milk to them. And calves that don't eat grain earlier in life, like Crystal said, they crash after weaning. And I don't know if you've ever had calves that you feel like they're thriving. Let's say you wean them at 2 to 3 months, and then they have like what they call like a setback at month like 3 or 4. That's because those heifers just aren't ready yet. And if you start with grain early on, that's one of the ways that you can really encourage that rumen development. One of the things that we do at our place is that when calves are getting done drinking milk, we'll actually take little handfuls of grain and put it in your hand and have the calf suck on it. And that starts to mentally train the calf of like, okay, when I get done drinking milk, now I eat grain. And it's amazing how after about a week of like literally hand feeding a calf, that she'll start to just put her nose right down into the dish because she's like mentally, look, cows are creatures of habit, right? So she starts to mentally associate, yep, I drink my milk and then I eat my grain, and that becomes a good way to keep a calf going. Crystal, earlier you said like too high of a milk replacer or too much protein. Like what kind of numbers should people be looking for on either a calf starter or a milk replacer?
Yeah, so again, it really depends on which products or brands you're using, how available it is. Something more like a 24-18 milk replacer with either 21% crude protein, or if it's amino acid balance, like an 18%. With like a 24-18, somewhere around there is plenty of protein for those young calves.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your sheet is a piece of paper that looks like this in case you wanted to take notes. So what we do at our place is that we use a 24-18 milk replacer, and that's in our 0 to 2 month range. And then we're using actually an 18% total calf starter. And one of the things that I've learned through kind of feeding show heifers is exactly what Crystal said. You can feed too much protein. And how do you notice that? You'll notice that through the calves get loose, right? Their manure is loose, they scour. Because there's a difference, right, between nutritional scours and disease scours, right? And the other thing is, it kind of smells like ammonia in there sometimes, right? If the heifers are peeing out that much protein.
Yeah.
So, one of the other things that I would encourage you to do when you get home is grab one of your milk bottles that you're using routinely, fill it with water, and then do this. Why should you do this? Any ideas? What is that? See if it leaks, right? Why is it a bad thing if it leaks? Yep, you're exactly right. Yep, great answer. So if you have nipples at home that are leaking like this, they need to go in the trash. Because those nipples are worn out and the calf, like he said, is going to get down into the lungs, and then you're going to start to have risk of pneumonia, coughing, those kinds of things. So that's one of the things that I would encourage you to do when you get home, is to check that. So any questions about kind of baby calves before we move on to a little bit older animals? Yeah.
So we feed whole milk. What's your thoughts on a balancer? Is it worth it?
Sure.
I found personally on our farm it's not to me, but just thoughts
You want to talk about
in general.
So-
and maybe explain what those products are.
Yeah,
too.
so balancer, meaning we're adding more solids, right, more fat or protein. That, when it was invented even 5 years ago, think about the milk we're making now, the fat and protein that our cows are making now is so much higher than it was 5 years ago. So oftentimes, we don't really need more protein and fat and protein into those calves. We have enough of the basic nutrients to the calves. Sometimes we might need other goodies. So like we have a product called Fortifier, and so what that is like vitamins, minerals, some like gut health technology. You can get some like any of your carrier coccyx protection in it, clarify.
Control,
yes. And so there are still products that you can add to whole milk to beef it up, but it doesn't necessarily need to be fat and protein.
Yeah, I think a Fortifier is a great product in the summer just to get the fly control in it, if no other reason, right?
Yeah, and just in our experience too, when you put them on some of those extra like vitamins and minerals too, you see them just slick up. They look really sleek and shiny too. So although whole milk's great, sometimes adding a little bit more on top of it can be helpful as far as some of those other goodies.
Yeah, it's a great question. Any other questions about the baby calf phase? Okay.
One thing too, I was just gonna say, he didn't talk about it, but a lot of times when you're starting calves on grain using one of those shallow bowls versus the deep bucket right out, hopefully some of you guys are doing this already. You can buy those shallow bowls, set it on top of that pail. It just makes it so much easier for those baby calves to find that grain and get into that grain before you stuff them down to a pail.
Yeah, that's a great point, Crystal. There's two things that we use at our place to help encourage grain consumption besides the hand feeding. One is those shallow bowls and agroplastics as well as calf tail cells. I'm a huge fan of those. and ours use those probably until they're at least a month old, sometimes a little bit older. And then if you've ever seen, it's called a Braden bottle, but basically a grain bottle. You can buy those on Amazon or Nasco, maybe not Nasco anymore, but other places like that. You can hang and put the grain in there. We have a calf that was just born last Saturday, and she's already chewing on some grain out of that bottle because it allows them again to like kind of get into that kind of routine. So those are really good ones too. Cool. All right. So once it's time to wean, like Crystal said, hopefully your calves are eating somewhere between like 6 to 8 pounds of grain. I would say on a commercial dairy, you'd wean at probably 2 months of age, right? On show heifers, I recommend going up to 3. Because I think that last month of milk replacer is one where they're eating enough grain at that point and they can really take off and kind of go from there. So that's what we do at our place. We're pushing grain pretty hard at that point. And then you start to think about weaning them at 3 months of age. Crystal, do you want to talk a little bit about like what a good weaning program would look like? Do you cut them off right away? Do you do once a day? What do you see pre-op success with?
Yeah, so I'm sure you guys all know that trying to minimize any stress, maintain as much consistency, and take it slow is key to success for a good weaning transition. So starting to ramp that milk down, and that can look a few different ways, whether you're just cutting out one feeding. Normally you kind of start walking it down for that. So like if you're doing 4 quarts twice a day, 3 quarts, then you can move to 3 quarts twice a day, 2 quarts twice a day, 2 quarts once a day. And just do it very slowly. And then again, make sure they have that grain intake. You can even hold them back. If they're not eating as much grain, if you don't think they're eating enough, they're not eating that 6 to 8 pounds, you can still keep them where they are. Maybe again, hold the milk, cut the milk down a little bit, but maybe you don't move them on in your program until you're sure that they're set up for success. And then doing the move itself, trying to minimize as much as possible. I know sometimes you have calves coming in behind them, you need to move them, but trying to figure out the best way to slow that process down as much as possible. Try not to do multiple things on one day, right? So we're not trying to wean, vaccinate, move all in the same day. Just trying to minimize that stress. There are some products out there that can help minimize stress as much as possible, give them a little bit of extra support, because it is going to be stressful no matter what you're doing. It's going to be a little stressful. So if you have any sort of disease or anything else, they might have been able to tolerate it up to that point, but just that little extra stress might make them break with a pneumonia or a cocci or something like that. So there are some products out there, like we have one called Boost, that's just some antioxidants, essentially
I think I got some
oils.
samples here if you want to talk.
Yeah, so we have this product called Boost. Something along those lines can be helpful to just aid them through this stressful program, this transition, because as much as we try to minimize the stress, it is still there. So everyone's program looks different, and then whether you're starting to pair house them, moving them into a big group. Ideally, we're not moving them into big groups yet. Only like 4 calves, 6 calves at first would be great. Smaller, even better, and just slowly make each of those changes. Once we wean is typically when we start to introduce hay. So I would keep the same grain, the grain that they're used to seeing for a while yet, probably a week or 2 at least. If you're going to start to make a grain change, wait for a little bit into that weaning. Once they're weaned for a little bit, settled into their new housing, new environment, start to introduce some hay. Keep them on the same grain for a little bit there. Try not to make too drastic of feed changes.
Yeah, so in your packet, I included a sheet that has basically the grain program that we use at our place and kind of recommend, which you'll see I think it starts at month 3 on there and runs up through like month 6 or 9. What we're trying to do is to minimize the stress. Yeah, it's on the back of that one, yep. What we're trying to do is to minimize the stress, and you can see a really gradual change, right, over 3 or 4 months. Because animals they respond to stress or change with stress, right? That's stressful for heifers, so you have to move them probably. Like, that's already a guarantee. You're gonna have to vaccinate them, like Crystal said. So as much as you can do to minimize the changes and spread out the changes is, I think, how you can really keep them growing. Our heifers do the best between months 3 and 6. They just kind of like grow like rocket ships during that time frame. And we measure our calves once a month to make sure that we know how they're tracking. I would say maybe some people can just eyeball them and look at them and see if they're growing. I'm not that good. I need the information and the data to say, okay, she grew 3 inches this month, this one grew 4 inches this month, this one grew 1 inch that month. When you have calves that are between 3 and 6 months of age, they should be growing 2 to 3 inches. That's probably a little high for a Jersey. I don't have enough experience with Jerseys, but they should be growing a lot and should continue to push over an inch a month up until you get to 12 months of age. So you'll see in there, that's where we start to introduce the 40% show feed. The high protein is, that's going to continue to help them grow. And if you pair that with a really good first crop hay, a long stem first crop hay, that's the right combination to deliver protein without delivering a lot of sugar, a lot of other energy that's what the calf's going to put weight on. So, Crystal, I know a lot of people talk about, can I feed a lower protein feed with maybe like an alfalfa or like a hay that would be a little bit more, a little richer hay? Can you talk a little bit about why that might not be a great idea?
Sure. Yeah, so those baby calves still have a pretty high protein requirement. And alfalfa hay has the highest protein, so that'd be great if we could get them to eat it. Even on commercial calves after weaning, I would love if they could eat some nice alfalfa hay. However, alfalfa tends to be stemmy, which is a little hard on their mouths, so they might not actually eat it. And also, they can kind of sort some. They can eat just the leaves if they want. And now they're getting way too much protein. They're going to get a little loose on you. They're not actually getting the fiber that we need. And so getting a grass hay can be a little more consistent. They're going to eat it. It's nice and soft on their mouths. They'll actually consume it. It has some energy and some fiber, some protein, but then we can make up the rest of that protein and energy that they need in that grain. And so getting them to eat, any calf, any cow, number one is always making sure they're eating, right? So what we can do to get them to eat there. So yeah, it tends to be like a 8, 10, 12% protein hay, and then trying to get fairly high energy on those youngest calves, and as they grow, they need less protein, less energy, so you can start to give them not quite as nice of a hay.
Yeah, I recommend getting your hay sampled at least once a year and just see what you're working with. And the things that I look at on a hay sampler first is the protein. So like Crystal said, 8 to 12% protein is a good range to stay within there. I would encourage you to look at sugar as well. I would like less than 8% sugar. I think we all know what happens when you eat a lot of sugar as a person. It's not great for your show heifers either. And then I also tend to look at it's an NDF would be the number on there, or neutral digestible fiber. You're looking for a number around 50% because a lot of that digestible fiber can become calories if there's too much digestible fiber in your hay. It's a great thing in corn silage and grains and other things like that, but not great in your show heifer hay. So once you're on the show feed, now I can, oh, you have a question? Yes, sir.
What kind of hay that you'll forward and really grass hay?
That's like that's the hardest part, right? Isn't it? Yeah. I think you need to have a hay that is a couple things. One is like a good mix of grasses is good, and if as late mature first crop as you can make it, and still not have it get musty, not have it get unedible and things like that. The hay that we use is usually a blend of like some Timothy, some brome, things like that.
That's what we use.
That's what you use. Okay. What have you found then with using it?
The Timothy will build that.
Yeah.
The rear rib and the brome will build that forward.
Yep.
That's kind of what we found. So.
Absolutely, and some heifers are picky, right? Some of them don't like brome. Some of them, most of mine have been pretty good on Timothy, but the kind of that, it almost looks rougher, but they just seem to go to it. We rotate hays some too at home. I think just having a little bit of variety once in a while just kind of gets them up and going again, for sure. Yeah, great question. Any other questions? And then I'll start talking about weight loss, which is I know what everybody wants to talk about. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Is there a difference between feeding the pelleted calf starter and a textured grain?
Great question.
Yeah, so there's pros and cons to both. Calves, most people would say that calves tend to eat a little more textured feed. It has a little more molasses on it, seems a little more palatable, we'll go for it. The downside is they can sort it, right? So in a complete pellet, they don't have any choice. They're getting exactly the amount of starch, amount of carbs, amount of protein we want. And you'll see a lot more consistent manures out of pellet-fed calves. And then, yeah, if you ever walk and look at pails of textured calves, you'll see some that there's just like so much corn left behind. Some it's the opposite. They eat all the corn. And so there's pros and cons. So you might get more intakes off of the textured, but you might have picky ones, especially jerseys. I don't know if you want to give them the option to sort. So, well, yeah, it just depends on your calves and what you're going for.
we started ours on mixed textured grain, like Crystal said. I've always found the young calves seem to go on it a little. It smells a little sweeter, and then we try to transition them over to all pellets by the time they're 4 or 5 months old. But again, like really gradual changes, because if you pull the textured feed and switch to pellets on a hard change, they'll step back on you, and then it feels like you got to get everything rebooted again. Yep,
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, pretty much any feed change, you want to feather, right? Feather out what you were doing, feather in what the new change is.
Yep. Any other questions? All right, so how do you get weight off heifers? Couple things. We have a product, it's called the Herd First Show Pack. There's, I believe, a flyer for that, and that's a mineral pack. So I'm going to start by saying make sure you have some kind of a mineral pack in your feed so that your heifers are getting enough minerals, are getting enough vitamins, continue to grow. Because when you're trying to get heifers thinner, you've got 2 ways to do that. The first way you can do that is you can grow it out of her. So we're going to make her taller, and she's going to maintain the same weight, right? Now she's thinner appearance-wise because she's taller. The other way is she's going to probably stop growing on you, and then you're going to need to try to take the weight off where she loses the weight, more like a classic human exercising program, right? So on your younger heifers, I encourage you to grow them out of them, and you'll see that we keep our heifers heavier in the spring. I think it's important to not have them too thin in the spring because it's really hard for them to make the distance to the fall. Last year we had the junior champion Ayrshire at World Dairy Expo. The heifer was second in the spring show, and I was perfectly comfortable with that because those heifers need to have the oomph to kind of get through down to the fall. If you're measuring your heifers and they're still gaining between like 3/4 of an inch to an inch of stature a month, I would grow it out of them. So make sure you're only feeding like a higher protein show feed. Make sure you don't have a grow or anything else in there that's adding a lot of calories, and just grow her out of it. If you've got a yearling heifer, maybe a Jersey, where they're growing like a 1/2 inch a month or something like that, now we need to take weight off. So there's a couple things that we do. You got a really junky hay, and by junky I mean like a 5% protein or less. That can be a pretty good option. Ditch grass or DNR grass or some of that kind of stuff is a good way to do that. Or then we end up feeding straw in most cases. So trying to find a straw that wasn't really chopped up by a combine. A lot of the combine now have like the rotary heads, or basically they like chop it up into a fine dust. Like heifers just won't eat that. I haven't had any luck with that. But if you can find somebody that has like a combine that's a little bit more of an older school combine, and it's really long pieces of straw, that's the most ideal. The straws, in my experience, the best straw eating that we've had is with oat straw. I would say heifers tend to eat oat straw the best. Barley straw or rye isn't too bad. Wheat straw is pretty rough. Now I've had people tell me that I just need to be meaner and they'll eat it eventually, and that's probably true. The scariest part about feeding straw is for the first 72 hours, they will look at you like you're the meanest person in the world. Like, you are my caretaker, I loved you, and now we are not on good terms anymore. And my wife, Casey, who's in the back, we talk oftentimes about, like, we almost have to break the heifer's will to fight us, but that's really what you're trying to do. But I promise you, if you give it 72 hours and don't bail, they will eventually start to get going and come back around. The important part is you gotta start that early enough, right? Because if they stop eating for 3 days and your show's in 3 weeks, now we got a problem. So most of the time when we're starting to really try to take weight off heifers, my goal is to get them big enough by, let's say, the first week of August. I'm guessing a lot of you are going to Junior State Fair, right? Maybe you'd want to stop a little earlier, but then start to introduce the straw probably 3 or 4 weeks before your show. That'll give you a week before your show to put them back on hay and put some of the rib back. That's a lot of what we try to do, is to just try to balance that a little bit and make sure that you know what show you're targeting for your best success, and then build the whole program towards that. So I'll stop there and ask if there's any questions on that, but that's kind of the basics of what we do for weight loss.
So you keep them on the protein or on the straw?
Yeah, on the protein. For mine, if they're not growing a lot anymore, I would switch to a lower protein at that point. Because I think, Crystal, we know that if you feed too much protein to an older heifer, she'll gain weight on it, right?
Right.
So-
They can utilize that for energy.
When you say lower protein, you mean?
Like an 18 is fine, 16 or 18. Yep.
Yeah, and just touching again on Josh's point, like making sure that they're getting enough vitamins and minerals. knowing what the feed you're feeding is formulated for. So like this 18%, this is formulated for a baby calf. So the vitamins and minerals are designed for baby calf level. If you try feeding this, this is the only thing you're feeding to an 800-pound heifer because she's getting heavy, you're like, oh, we'll just give her 2 pounds of this a day in hay. She is not getting the vitamins and minerals that she needs. So you need to know what you're feeding, what it's formulated for, targeted for, just to make sure you're actually covering that heifer's size needs.
Yeah, that's why we have the mineral pack. It's like a 1 to 2 pound product, and it feeds all the vitamin minerals, like Crystal said, and then nothing more, which is kind of what you're looking for at that point. The other key to getting weight loss off of heifers, walking, like miles and miles of walking. So I mentioned that heifer that we had last year that was the junior champion at World Dairy Expo. My wife and I walked her every single day for a mile, or probably 5 days a week for a mile. Like, took her out of the pen and like we just went for walks. It just became our routine that we would eat dinner and then take the fat Ayrshire and the fat brown Swiss out for a walk. To the point that we got on like a neighborhood Watertown Facebook page because people were driving around and this guy was like, hang on, I'm from Chicago. Hang on, there's literally people walking cows on the road. I told you Wisconsin was like hillbilly country, and he like drove off in his Tesla. But there is not a safer way to get weight off of heifers than exercise, like lots and lots of exercise, and do not let them out on a lot of pasture grass, because grass has a lot of energy in it, right, Crystal?
Yeah, sugar's great if you're trying to get them to eat, right? It's candy, but it's energy.
Yeah, yep, so that's a lot of what we do to get weight loss off the heifer. Straw if you need to, really low, like get it down into like a basic mineral, even like a 40-pound of soybean meal can work too. And then lots and lots and lots of walking. Any other? Oh, probiotics. Just a comment on probiotics. So I've got Priority One here, I've got Catalyst, I've got Golden Link. I think they're all great products. I've used all 3 of them. That's why all 3 of those buckets are dusty. I think the most important part is to find a probiotic that you feel like your heifers are responding to. And by that I mean when you add the probiotic in a couple days later, are they starting to eat more hay or not? Do they look more aggressive or not? I think those are all great products. The people that I take advice from, like a Pit Crew Genetics, for example, they use a different product than all 3 of these. I think the key thing is to make sure that you have one, and then just experiment with it. We've got 3 of them because sometimes it seems like heifers respond differently to different probiotics. I'm sure the people that sell all one of those would be that's all in my head, and half of this is all going to be in your head because it's in mine all the time. But I think just choosing one and experimenting with it is the best thing I can recommend on probiotics.
When do you start them?
Good question. When you start them on the probiotics, we usually start ours on it at about post-weaning. So like our December calves, we've just started on them. Usually up until that point, your milk replacer might have a Smart Care or Salmonex or some of the other probiotics in it already in there. Yep, good question. Any other questions? I know that we're coming to time, and I want to make sure everybody has a chance to look at the heifers back in the barn there.
Any other thoughts, ideas, or things that we didn't cover?
Yes, sir.
Just wondering if you're doing OA for...
Okay, great question. Yeah, okay. I'll give you two opinions on Otay. Otay, I think, is a secret weapon the night before the show. So if you've got Otay, this is a lot of what we try to do. Start feeding Otay at maybe like, 6 o'clock the night before the show. You will not have a better rib going into the ring if you have a heifer that eats so much hay she doesn't need beef ball. Those are my favorite days when you come in and the heifer's like all caged out and you're like, all right, yeah, we're going to play ball today. We don't even need beef ball. Oat hay is a secret weapon for that. If you're going to use it at home before the show, make sure you get it tested because sometimes oat hay can have a lot of sugar in it. It can have a lot of calories in it. It can be a little risky at home. That's why I like oat straw. Because it's close to oat hay, but you've got the actual oats out of there, right? So the oats can be a little bit risky on calories, but to have that at a show, I love it. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other? Yes, Holly?
I have a question about water.
Okay.
What is your theory on water and transitioning them to get ready for the show? Because
Sure.
nothing's worse than when you ride and nobody wants to drink.
Nobody wants to
Then
drink.
at home, everybody has a different theory about water. So let's just talk about.
Sure. So this is what we do. Basically, 2 weeks before the show, probably a week before the show, we start twice a day water. So that means we pull the water tubs out and we walk them out to water. If you can use the same tub that you're going to use at the show, try to do that so they start to get into the routine of like, yep, I don't get to drink anymore when I want to. We go to water twice a day. There's a lot of theories out there, though. I know some people that go to show and put water bowls in for all the heifers, too. I don't think that's a bad way to do it. People successfully do that. I don't know, Sarah, what you guys do, but... Huh? Twice a day water, yeah. But I think just getting them into the habit of going to water is what we try to do. Obviously, make sure you have a water filter. Because if you go to the Alliant Energy Center, we all know that the water there can sometimes be a little bit iffy. State Fair Park's not a whole lot better sometimes. So have a water filter. There are products that, or I would say more typical in the beef industry, that can neutralize the water. I guess he just walked off. But there's one that we've used that if you just Google it, it's on Amazon, or I can try to, if you find me later, I'll get the name for you. Or electrolytes is actually, we've used that at State Fair before. That was something I learned from take like a blue light is a pretty good cheap electrolyte, get a bucket of that and start her on blue light at home. So that when she gets to State Fair, she's like, oh, the water always tastes like that, and it kind of masks some of the other stuff from the State Fair water. So is that kind of what you were hoping for?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Casey, do you remember what the name of that product is that neutralizes the water taste?
It's the fresh H2O.
Oh, thank you, Fresh S2H. Yep, that one. That's another good one too. We've used that one successfully as well. Show morning, like we stop watering heifers the night before. Maybe they get one more drink at like 8 o'clock or so. But I would say that's a mostly hard rule. If you have a heifer that's just not eating the next morning, just go ahead and give her water. Because you'd be better off to have that, and maybe she has to get a little bit more water than having one that doesn't eat at all and your day is kind of wrecked already. There's not a more stressful time than the morning of the show when it's time to fill heifers, but try to just listen to the heifer a little bit. Any other questions? Cool. If not, make sure if you didn't get one for your family, make sure you grab a feed scoop. Those feed scoops have measurements on it, so that way you know how many pounds of feed you're feeding. One side's for pellets and one side's for textured feed. We've got some hats if anybody's interested in some Herd First hats. That's our show brand. And Chris and I will be around for a while if you've got any other questions. We also have Ashley Shue with us from Cargill. Ashley's there in the middle. She's videoing for us. And I just really appreciate everybody's interest today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you guys.